Hello, everybody. It's me, Will. This is your Chapo for this week. I'm just giving you this brief introduction here because this week's episode, we got a double shot of interviews lined up for you. First, we got Chapo healthcare correspondent Tim Faust is back again for a follow-up on the debacle and abomination that is the AHCA and more healthcare disaster. Then we talked to the writer Miya Tokumitsu about work, why it sucks, and how we can begin to imagine a world in which we don't have to fucking go to the office every day. So, hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Chapo, everybody. Let's go. We're back this week. Joining me is Felix and Matt, but special guest coming in, healthcare correspondent Tim Faust is back again. Tim.
It's the biggest atrocity in healthcare
history. Indeed it is. We got Tim to come on sort of semi-last minute to respond to the events of this past week regarding the AHCA. I'm going to do my Kent Brockman thing now and just say, Tim, would you recommend that it's time to panic and go crazy in the streets?
I love to panic. It comes naturally to me. So yes, I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's a certain coalition of, I guess, smug or disaffected liberal which might posit that, oh, well, the Senate's still there. Now there's all these checks and balances in place to prevent this thing from becoming law. But those are the same checks and balances that were intended to keep Trump from becoming president. So we live in the Iglesias world now. Nothing is forbidden anymore. Bailamos.
But the thing to keep in mind, though, is that having your neighbor crack your head open and feast on the goo inside is still covered by insurance.
Before we get into this, now a lot of people actually haven't read this bill. I have, and there's some pretty bad stuff in there. So the hero of the bill, General Brett Hawthorne, the youngest general in United States history, is a bear of a man, and he has to sexually entangle the Iranians, and this somehow relates to pre-existing conditions.
Well, having a hard-on is a pre-existing condition, and I was pre-existing the entire time I read that bill.
Yeah. I'm actually making... You know, Tim, you can help me make these shirts. I'm making anti-AHCA shirts, and they say, fake news is a pre-existing condion.
Yeah.
We're going to take this down once and for all.
So, Tim, the last time we had you on, like you helped us to narrate like a brief history of the American healthcare disaster. And we sort of like left it off like... the most recent innovation was Obamacare, basically. And we established that the private health insurance market, like health insurance companies, they make money by denying coverage, right? Like that's their sort of profit model.
They make money by receiving premiums from their customers, which of which they pay out a portion in claims and expenses. Under the ACA, the way you could deny those claims was pretty severely narrowed, and the way you could inflate those premiums was also pretty severely narrowed. It was a pretty like fucking half-dick attempt at regulating the kind of this payment side of the industry. But yes, fundamentally, like insurers who receive more money in premiums and subsidies, because there's just a fuck ton of subsidies from the federal government, are profitable, and those that pay out more than they take in are not profitable.
So like Obamacare, it essentially forces you, like you have to spend money, and they take your money and pay off the insurance companies not to deny certain claims.
Right. That's because most people are healthy and don't cost very much to take care of. And because they're healthy and insurance is expensive, they didn't want to buy in. So by having a regulated approach to everybody must buy this private good, you can, it's the term of the idea of the risk pool, right? The risk pool broadens, you get more people who are young and healthy, and then overall relative amount of cost the insurance company has to spend people that are sick goes down. I mean, if the entire thing is convoluted because it's inherently pretty dumb, right? Like the obvious easy solution, as we talked about last time, is just everybody pay that in taxes and then have the government spend that money. The government's the only actor that receives both the cost of providing care and the cost of not providing care, which people get sick and die. They're the best positioned person, but we don't live in that world. We live in a terrifying F.A. Hayek world where healthcare is a commodity and it's normal good and people use it, and we got to fucking live with that.
Okay, so like now, what is the situation that we find ourselves in now? It just the AHCA just passed the House. It's going to the Senate, correct? What does the AHCA do? And like, is this truly as much of an abomination as people say it is?
It is. So let me go through this. So top line, the AHCA leaves, I don't know, like 4/5, 90%, whatever, of the ACA intact. It doesn't affect a lot of the things that are in the ACA. It has two big prongs I'll talk about, and then some other fucking phalanges flying on the side. One, it creates a $900 billion tax cut from, surprise, people that are already wealthy in insurance companies. And that tax cut is then reconciled by providing $900 billion fewer funding for Medicaid. It's a full frontal assault on entitlement programs in a couple of ways that I find to be borderline treasonous. It finally here's like the white knuckle fangs out attack on entitlements.
This is what
in America.
Paul Ryan has been trying to do his entire career.
He's wet, dude.
Like a baby seal.
And the second thing is this. Instead of the individual mandate, which is, a great abomination, introduces the idea of continuous enrollment penalties, in which if you are not insured for more than 63 days, insurance companies can charge you a 30% markup for the following year on your premiums. And that's an attempt to ostensibly, nominally, an attempt to prevent people who are sick from buying insurance as they need it. I can talk about both these things in turn because they're both really, really bad for different reasons. And then lastly, there's some you get fucking tax credits now. Sometimes we're inching ever closer toward the dream world of HSAs, which are entirely a lobbyist invention. That's Rooney and Golden Rule Insurance Company in 92 began lobbying for HSAs, and now they're finally becoming realer. Also, other little side effects. Under the ACA, old people can only be charged 3x what young people are charged. That's now broadened to 5x. And instead of getting subsidies based on income to pay off your premiums, you get subsidies based on age, between $2,000 and $4,000, which isn't shit. So those are the small changes.
Wow, Steve Bannon is such a genius economic nationalist.
There's also the idea of high risk pools, which I'll talk about, I think, a lot.
One thing that has been sort of playing in the coverage, or a lot of the things that people have picked out as the sort of sensationalist graph that I wanted to ask you about, is this idea that it would make particularly if you are basically being a woman a pre-existing condition, how much what I seem to read is that the people are defending it by saying, well, the AHCA doesn't actually do that. But what it actually does is just allow insurance companies to do that.
Why would they do that? Why would they make those things pre-existing conditions just because it would increase their profits? I mean, absurd. Why? I mean, allowing private industries to do whatever they want never results in them doing whatever they want.
It's not logical for them to treat their female customers that way.
Yeah,
right?
That's actually how they invented chemotherapy. We let health insurance companies do whatever they want, and they just started bombarding people with chemicals and cool radiation, and they accidentally invented chemotherapy.
And Spider-Man.
It was called Operation Cool Procedure.
Triple parentheses, Spider-Man.
Tim, just speak a little bit on this issue of how it would affect women in general, and women specifically their healthcare needs.
Cool. So right off the top of it, literally being a woman is not a pre-existing condition, but anything can be a pre-existing condition. So a cool thing the ACA did was, everyone who's heard the episode knows that I fucking hate the ACA. I didn't go far enough, but in this context, one must defend it and argue for it because it's significantly better than the alternative. A cool thing the ACA did was introduce the idea of pre-existing condition to replace blanket terms like illness or sickness, right? Like everybody carries with them a host of pre-existing conditions, and the ACA
It's called
said
life, brother.
that's right. The heaviest one of all. One of the cool things the ACA did was introduce the idea of community rating, which is an insurer has to charge premiums that cost generally the same for an entire region, whether that's a state, a county, whatever. And it can adjust those costs based on age and nothing else, right? So you can charge an older person, as I said, 3x what you charge a younger person, but you can't change the premium costs for things like gender, or whether you've had cancer in the past, or whether you've had rabies, or whether you're really tall, or whether you have pale skin and might get melanoma. There's some things that mitigate that, like if you're a smoker, the most persecuted group in America, you can be charged a little bit more for being cool. But for the most part, community rating means one community is charged the same across the board. Under the MacArthur Amendment, which is the thing on April 23rd that got the AHCA back in the limelight, the fucking Serum X that fell into the zombie's head, states have the option to use waivers to get out of community rating for people who don't have continuous coverage. So if you have insurance from now until the end of time, you're unaffected by this, but if you drop out for more than 63 days, when you re-enroll, your state has the option to enter into a waiver that removes restrictions on essential health benefits and removes restrictions on insurers from community rating. They can send you a big fucking packet saying, "Hey, how big is your dick? What that mouth do, etc." And then use that to determine a premium that is custom tailored to your situation, which means like the example that Mike.com passed around was a woman who went on, she was raped, and she took medicines and treatments related to protecting yourself against HIV/AIDS in the event you've been raped. Now that treatment is a pre-existing condition. You've taken a medicine in the past which might indicate you have HIV. Therefore, we have to operate, the insurance company says. So it's not literally like that she was a woman or that she was raped, but that she did the fucking reasonable thing after you've been assaulted and take care of yourself. I would posit is, like, it's hard to fucking find out what's more heinous than this sliding scale because it goes off so far you can't see it. You can't literally deny coverage, but you can offer somebody a $30,000 a year premium because they've taken a medicine in the past, or maybe they've taken a weird kind of vitamin. Maybe they didn't take Gorilla Mind because they sought treatment for being assaulted or for being sick in the past or whatever, or having a cancer scare.
So what we're seeing like with the AHCA, we sort of talked about it a little bit the last time, is the sort of the sort of conservative or capitalist mindset writ large looks like when you're dealing with healthcare and the health and well-being of a country as large as the United States of America. And I think what it comes down to is we're seeing a lot of the defenses of this come down to personal responsibility, right? And this idea that I exercise and eat right, why should I pay for your bad choices? And This comes down to this idea of individual choice being the sort of the arbiter of value in this healthcare market.
Yes, it's a combination of that and this idea, this fucking moronic idea that healthcare is a regular economic good, like bubblegum or pumpkins. And if you can get more of them, you will get more of them. That people will get recreational heart surgery or something like that. This idea that healthcare it's a fucking Kevin Williamson piece, that healthcare is a scarce commodity which must be protected and allotted. And it's allotted to those who have the most ability to pay for it.
You fucking suckers. Well, you guys are busting your ass at work. Me and my fellow Medicaid shirkers are going in and getting MRIs all day. It fucking rules.
me and my friends go down to the hospital in our prospector gear, our ass flaps dangling in the wind, just digging pickaxes into the floor, trying to mine more healthcare.
That's exactly right. So the AHCA is predicated in these ideas and the idea that the poor are somehow getting a free ride. It's the Cadillac Queen idea. 30 years later, which it's pernicious and it's extremely effective in rallying a certain kind of spineless, like this fucking Fred Upton guy in Michigan. Like it brought him into line. The personal responsibility kind of mythos comes in with the continuous care requirement. The idea that people will only buy healthcare. The only reason people don't buy healthcare is because they're trying to wait until they're sick. Well, when actually it's people can't afford to buy healthcare because the largest employer in the U.S. is Walmart, who doesn't provide healthcare, and people just literally can't afford the premiums. That this idea that people are in mass attempting. I know Felix has said this literally before, but in mass it's false. The idea that people are literally choosing not to buy insurance because fuck it, it's a gamble. Why should I pay insurance companies money? That in large does not happen. People just can't afford to pay for healthcare and thus don't buy it. So continuous coverage requirements take this group of tens of millions of people that can't afford to use their actual income to buy healthcare, and then punishes them further by removing community rating protections and letting them be charged. And in general, people that are poor are going to be sicker, so they're going to be charged even higher rates. And so there's this idea that the market should be able to take care of all this, like unchain insurers to do what they will, but with one exception: high risk pools. Because as we know, people that are sick cost a ton to take care of. And no insurer can really make a profit off people that are sick. They're undesirable. They're not profitable. That's the entire reason they relented and let Medicare and Medicaid get made in the first place. Take the sick people and take the poors and get them out of the markets so that we can find people that are able-bodied and can afford to pay and take money from them. But what we're seeing is that, like, there's this idea of the high risk pool, where the state or where an insurer will take a bunch of people who have pre-existing conditions, people that have had cancer, people that have diabetes. Diabetes is a huge one. People that have melanoma, other kinds of cancer, HIV, AIDS, whatever, and kind of put them in their own little separate submarket. Take them out. Instead of giving them social good, they put them in their own little separate pool, and then give them some quantity of subsidy to pay for their premiums. Instead of providing for them through a social program like Medicare or Medicaid, they're just given kind of a weird exemption in the private market. And so the AHCA offers, after the Upton Amendment, $15 billion a year to help insurers pay for the cost of taking care of these people, as opposed to paying for their actual treatment. The thing is, $15 billion per year doesn't solve shit.
It's an interesting thing, because I've seen, since the zombified AHCA came back, I've seen a lot of revival of this shit that was very sort of late 2000s. It was about how unhealthy people need to exercise. They need to live like sort of Instagram fitness thoughts. And I love it so much because it's a perfect marriage of our two religions, our two national identities, which are Calvinism and just Instagram bullshit. Somehow
Kleinism.
There's now this onus, if you're a Republican, there's an onus on poor people to work out like an Olympic weightlifting athlete and sleep 8 hours a day, even though you have suicidal ideations about your two jobs, but can't cut your fucking wrist because you have kids, and they would be sent to some awful foster home, and you're just too mentally exhausted to even walk home. But it's a great, it used to be we just said that poor people, they did something bad in their last life, or they were destined to be like this. But now they're supposed to be 7% body fat.
Yeah.
It's bro science. It's bro science. And it's, everyone used to make fun of Dan Quinn for saying, like, if you blend stevia in water, it will melt away tumors. Well, now that's the Republican healthcare policy,
like I remember when the first when ACA was being debated, the fucking dickhead libertarian head of Whole Foods had a
John Mackey
op-ed where he said, look, all this talk about healthcare, people just need to go to Whole Foods. Yeah. So Tim, I wanted to dispel one thing once and for all, and this is a thing that I think is a huge barrier to acceptance of the need for universal healthcare in America, because I think a lot of people, all right, so you've got opponents. If you want to break down people who are opposed to universal healthcare, you've got just the ghoulish capitalist class that wants to make profit from healthcare, and that's their motivation. Then you have the ideological sort of apparatchiks who genuinely believe in this, like, just Calvinist nightmare where people are punished for every bad decision, and that's what the market is there for. But I think you have a lot of people who are operating under the genuine delusion that as Raul Labrador said at his town hall today, before getting booed like a fucking open micer at Showtime at the Apollo.
How many of y'all like dying?
Quote, "No one in America dies for lack of health care."
Jesus.
Like, this is a genuine thing that people believe in America, including, and I think it's something where they can't assimilate the reality of how savage and vile this country is when it comes to people who don't have the means to access the market the way that we've set it up. That they have basically willed themselves to believe that they don't live in this country, and that allows them to then make all these asinine arguments. But I think for a lot of them, it comes from this deluded belief that, well, you can walk into an emergency room without paying, that means no one in America dies for lack of health care. And I would just like you once and for all to fucking put a goddamn nail through the heart of this zombie fucking vampire bullshit.
I would like him to die from lack of health care.
Tim, when they go low, we go high.
Yeah, I'll fucking aim for the face. So one more thing. So this market will always solve the problems. Ideology is exempted even within the AHCA through the creation of high risk pools. But now we're at a point where we're just redoing things we did 20 years ago and 20 years before that didn't work. We had high risk pools in Florida and California in the 90s, and they fucking bombed because we had a fucking high risk pool right before the ACA. It was called like the PCIP. So it was a high risk pool for people that would be covered under the ACA, but the ACA wasn't in place yet. It spent $5 billion to cover 100,000 people and ran out of money in a year and a half. Like, there's no way you can, like, paying for people who are sick coverage isn't profitable. That's the fucking bottom line. And there are people, like, I'd add a fourth kind of person to the list you went through, like these weird, soulless, lich people who do believe that the private market can take care of people and can provide the best solutions. And they're wrong, and they've always been wrong, but they're also powerful, and I hate them. We've talked about so far in the AHCA kind of the idea of the continuous enrollment penalty and high-risk pools. I don't know if I mentioned it, but the continuous enrollment penalty replaces the individual mandate. No longer are you forced to buy healthcare or pay a nominal tax penalty. Now you just pay a giant penalty to a private company if you get fired from your job.
Yeah.
It's really good. The big thing, the real big kahuna of the AHCA is just disemboweling Medicaid. Finally, they figured it out. Right now, Medicaid and Medicare are entitlement programs, right? A state is required to provide them, and what the word required means has changed a lot in the past 20 years, or the past 50 years. The ACA did a great job of making required mean something closer to the literal word required, but states can't deny them, and the federal government helps subsidize them. With Medicaid, right now, in the before times, the federal government subsidizes between 50 and 75% of a state's entire Medicaid budget, and that a number is adjusted year over year. So if a state has an economic downturn, the feds can, in theory, pick it back up. And states are required to provide the rest, and they can't turn, with some exceptions, a lot of exceptions, they have to provide some standard of coverage, and that's what causes Medicaid budget crises in states, because they can't cut other programs and they can't deficit spend. And there's a whole bunch of shit entitled with that. But finally, like this world where people who are poor have a little bit of care is being removed entirely down the road through the idea of states can now opt into having either block grants or per capita caps. They're a little bit different. In short, block grants are a state gets a flat amount of money per year instead of like a matching thing from the feds. Per capita caps are the amount of the money that the feds give the state is a function of how many people are enrolled in Medicaid, and you get like X number of dollars per person. And the amount at which that inflates over time is set at the beginning of the process by the feds. So Seema Verma, the evil woman who runs CMS now, will probably set those rates pretty low. So it's either way, states get much less money. But more importantly, with that, under the waiver programs that MacArthur Amendment posits, states now have abilities to impose tighter restrictions on who receives care and what kind of care is received. The reason states deny care under Medicaid is because there's not enough money for it and the state can't afford it. When you reduce the amount of funding even further and create more ways for the state to take away people's Medicaid or eligibility for Medicaid, you got just some absolutely heinous shit. I mean, you have what you had before the ACA, where a state can say you are only eligible for Medicaid if you have a physical disability and you're super poor. So if you're just like a person who works at Walmart or a person who is unemployed and you're in Texas and like simply making less than $16,000 a year is not enough to get federal government. You must also be blind or be missing an arm, and you must. There's like you can add in things like work requirements, which are bullshit because everybody on Medicaid's already working. You just can't afford to pay for healthcare. You can drug test. You can put all these roadblocks in the way. It's a war on the poor. This is the war on poverty, but not the war on poverty where we fund programs to keep people out of poverty. This is just like cops come and shoot people who are poor because they're getting away with something. And God forbid a poor person gets a fucking flu shot for free.
Well, okay, this is what I want to sort of like bring it full circle. I open this up by saying that like this is what Paul Ryan's been working his entire career to do. It almost doesn't matter that this is a healthcare bill. What they want to do is dismantle the last few shreds of the welfare state and greatly enrich private corporations and give massively redistribute wealth upward in this country. I want to talk a little bit just about the politics of this because, we saw it's widely believed that this bill is hugely unpopular, right?
Right.
And when the House Republicans passed it, of course, the Democrats apparently were cheering this, and they're going, nah, 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 nah. Hey, they did the goodbye song. And look, there may be reason to believe that this might be an anchor around their neck in the midterms. There's probably going to be some kind of backlash against them in 2018. Who the fuck knows? But here's my point: is that even if that's true, it's not as fucking important as how terrible this bill is, because what it really does is like they understand the politics of it, and what they want to do is, like I said, erase the welfare state. And I think the fact that they're doing it and getting away with it is just like any meager gains that Democrats are going to make in the House in 2018 is just pales in comparison to what they've actually accomplished with this.
And let's not forget that there's plenty of examples at the state level of Republicans doing exactly what all of these fucking worthless liberals have always sort of like rubbed their hands together as well. If they fuck up bad enough, we're sure to win. And I'm talking about Kansas and Wisconsin, where Sam Brownback and Scott Walker over the last decade have basically steered both of those states into a fucking ground. They've seen a collapse of their economy, collapse of all quality of life indices, collapse of employment. They all dropped significantly in state rankings in basically every economic category, and they're never going to fucking leave power. Because
and like
this idea that there's this automatic seesaw effect is bullshit, because they underestimate the degree to which these people just destroying your ability to live in this country demoralizes people.
Yes.
And makes them less likely to vote at all. Like,
exactly.
Not that they're going to go out and vote. And it energizes the scumbag ghouls who support these people.
Yes.
All of these fucking the Republicans who voted for this thing, they are protected by a triple canopy of gerrymandering and voter ID laws and massive pools of dark money, so they're not that scared. And why should they be? Especially since the Democrats are going to be wheeling out a bunch of like just no position holding veterans and local TV weathermen to try to run against them.
Don't worry, Tom Perez is going to spend $400 billion to get Johnny's son to build a Twitter bot. And they're going to fucking like target that at like the fucking local news accounts of Schenectady, New York. And that's going to save the fucking day. I fucking hate these people more than I hate anything else, because this isn't like, it's not simply a game. This is the lives of 100 million Americans. And in Texas, where I'm from, like this idea that at some point, Hitler will run for governor, and then they have to vote against him.
They got wheelchair Hitler. He won.
Greg, like, even worse than Greg Abbott, you've got Dan Patrick. You've got a guy who was on the radio just screaming for 10 minutes at a time back in the 90s. Now he's the most powerful person in the entire state. And he's the guy who's been leading the charge on taking money out of child welfare programs to put into the border wall. That's where the border wall money comes from. It comes from children who were taken out of school and then put into abusive, basically kiddie concentration camps where they're molested by unsanctioned private agencies because somebody saw that they had a bruise when they came into class. It's literally like a horror show. It's one of the most horrifying things I can think of to be a poor kid in Texas. And this all happens because the state party is so spineless that they were like, when Wendy Davis ran for governor a couple of years ago, people thought, well, finally someone charismatic, because before that they ran Chris Bell, who's just a fucking human mop who shows up to meetings but gets to run for things. And the state party in Texas didn't have a fucking operation in Houston, the biggest, bluest county in the state, Harris County, until like months before the election. And these Democrats will never ever champion us. They're congenitally and pathologically incapable of doing good, smart, audacious things when they need to happen. And the fact that they cheered like the fucking goodbye song when the Republicans passed the AHCA, I snapped my sunglasses in half. I do not have any, like, the only antidote for all this shit is universal single payer, universal health care, period, end of sentence.
Not gonna happen! As our August hashtag resistance leader Nancy Pelosi made very clear on the day of the vote, single payer will not be on the agenda for 2018. It'll just be a bunch of smiling dickhead, self-funding car dealers and hedge fund managers running against these guys with no fucking platform.
And they can't even pretend like it's a good idea. They can't even just give you that they're going to pretend that they're going to do it. They can't even say, hey, we might do it, so people might actually fucking vote for that for once. Just like they couldn't give Ellison the nod. They can't even give you a fucking wink if you're to the left, because they don't give a shit.
You know, I was thinking about that today. And like, there was this big to-do online because Howard Dean was talking about how there were 60 votes until Joe Lieberman backed out at the last minute. And a lot of people were like, oh my God, extra. And I remember at the time, I was like, I remember when that happened. And I remember hating that little piece of shit, that fucking just disgusting gnome even more than I had before, because he was single-handedly responsible for killing the public option. And that was public at the time. But what also happened shortly before that is that when Lieberman lost the primary and then ran as an independent and then 2 years later spoke at the fucking RNC to endorse John McCain, there was a big movement in the Senate to strip him of his seniority. And who stopped that from happening?
Good old Barry.
Barack motherfucking Obama, who had a heart-to-heart with Harry Reid, who wanted to cut his nuts off, and said, no, we need to be bigger than that. And then what happened? The motherfucker decides, yeah, public option, no thank you. Maybe if he had had his seniority stripped, there might have been some sort of leverage to make him not be a piece of shit at the last minute. Possibly. I don't know. But I do know that the alternative, sucking him off because that's what you saw in the West Wing, did not work.
I have two quick things I want to say but before I get off this topic. One, I'm sorry to use slurs in the show, but more like Joe Loserman.
Too far.
Sorry.
We'll edit this out later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number two, like we can now witness like the imminent horror of the AHCA and what we had in the ACA, and we can acknowledge that there's a moral compulsion to oppose with every bone in your body anything which advances the cause of Paul Ryan and the assault on the poor and the ill represented by the AHCA. I would posit that we have the same moral compulsion to oppose those who deny us single payer, who tell us it's impossible or infeasible. One, they're fucking idiots. It works everywhere else. Fuck off.
No, Tim, I think that was really well said. In that, like, yeah, they're the Paul Ryans of the world. We know what their agenda is. They're advancing it ruthlessly, but just as bad as them and should be opposed just as hard are the people who are ostensibly our representatives who are letting them do this, or at the very least not presenting a full-throated defense of our shared fucking humanity and values and, like, you know, fucking responsibilities to one another as a society.
28 million people will lose health care under the AHCA. 24 million people don't have health care under the ACA. Now, the shape and form of the way that they lose health care is different. It's much, much worse to be uninsured under the AHCA than it is the ACA, so it's not a directly compatible delta. But, like, to champion the Affordable Care Act for any other reason than to say this is why the AHCA is bad is short-sighted, myopic, despair-inducing, and fucking, like, impotent. And anybody who posits that we've got the best thing we can with the Affordable Care Act should be garroted. That's it.
If you need emergency preventative care to never get cancer through fitness, we're setting up CrossFit emergency rooms all across. There are emergency Herbalife.
It's the emergency room thing. You hear it over and over again. And, like, how much experience with any element of American health or just being sick in their lives or the lives of their families do people who say that have? Where they think the only thing you could need medically is like your arm set if it's broken or something like that. Like there's no, like you can't get chemo in the fucking emergency room. You can't get diabetes medicine at the fucking emergency room.
Well, they think it's poor people injuries. They think that they tried to steal a pie off a windowsill and a lady hit them with a fucking rolling pin and they had a little big bubble on their head and they were in a full body cast with their leg elevated and they saw a sexy nurse and they're like, what? That's how poor people get sick.
Yeah.
Okay, like, so to wrap things up, Tim, like it's not an exaggeration to say that this abomination is going to kill people at like an increased clip, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is it's an assault on entitlement programs. It is a fundamental re-understanding of what it means to give rights to a citizen. It is barbaric with a capital B, both B's. And it makes me disgusted. And the only thing we can do, only thing I want now to do is just yell about it. I don't know. I'm mad. Is posting good enough? I don't know. I'll post as hard as I can. Yes, it's bad.
Actually, never mind. I was wrong. I just discovered something online that has owned me. In response to the clip of Raul Labrador getting owned for saying no one dies because of lack of health care in America, someone said he's right. Hospitals are required by law to treat you regardless of insurance or ability to pay.
There you go.
And someone responded the way I just did by saying emergency room chemo isn't a thing. Well, and like they responded by saying chemo is a ripoff. Try cannabis oil. So that is the fucking intellectual level we're dealing with the dipshits walking around thinking that lack of health care doesn't kill people in this country.
Just send that guy goatse. That's what you should do to anyone who pushes this. Like, look, austerity is violence. It's someone trying to take your rights away from you if you can't afford health care. And anyone who's pushing the soft austerity of the ACA is what we should have forever. That's violence too. And you should send them goatsy. If it's not literal goatsy, it should be metaphorical goatsy. You should goatsy them out of office. You should rip their cheeks apart with the ring visible. None of these people deserve shit from you.
I wish they'd goatsy to the polls.
Oh my God.
Okay, we gotta break here because we have to do another interview. But Tim, if you wouldn't mind sticking around, I do want to do a reading series with you about healthcare reform.
Oh, hell yeah, let's do it.
It's
very good.
We have a reading series coming out. It just came out today that I think perfectly encapsulates this mindset about choice that we were talking about. I think it's going to be fun. So Tim, stay on the line for a little bit. We're going to break for a second. We're going to do another interview real quick, but we'll be back. Okay, we are back, and we are joined now by the writer Miya Tokumitsu to talk about a subject near and dear to my heart, work, why it sucks, and jobs, why no one should have one. Miya, how are you doing?
I'm great. Good morning from Melbourne, Australia.
Miya, this is a topic that you've written about quite a bit. It's just like basically the concept of work in our culture and like how we think about work and talk about it, and what are some possibilities to maybe change the way we think about this quite big topic. And the piece that I'm going to be referencing the most during this conversation is something that you just wrote for the New Republic, titled "The United States of Work." And in this piece, you sort of survey some of the latest, academic and various other like writing and studies done by certain people who look at the concept of work in America, and also sort of like a horizon beyond that, getting beyond this idea of jobs as not only a source of income but also meaning and fulfillment in our daily lives.
Yeah, and also jobs and waged work as a way of organizing society as well. Because, yeah, I mean, as many people know, and as I'm sure many of your listeners know, it's people just aren't managing actually to support themselves and meet their needs. And so, yeah, the two writers that I talk about, so the essay is mainly a review of two recent books. I think one of them is just coming out right now. That's Elizabeth Anderson's book. Two books that are, they're quite different, but they're both kind of reckoning with this idea that, the idea of the role work plays in our lives and shaping our lives, and maybe how that needs to change.
I want to talk about both of these two books, but like before that, this is against the backdrop of both, the fact that people are working more than ever and earning less money than ever. And you write here in the article, even before the global financial crisis of 2008, it had become clear that if waged work is supposed to provide a measure of well-being and social structure, it has failed on its own terms. Real household wages in the United States have remained stagnant since the 1970s, even as the cost of university degrees and other credentials rise. Young people find an employment landscape defined by unpaid internships, temporary work, and low pay. So against that, you examine these two books, the first of which is called, by Elizabeth Anderson, is called Private Government, How Employers Rule Our Lives. Because you talk about like what is this idea of the workplace and employment in general as a kind of private or almost shadow government.
Yeah, well, this is something that I struggled with. I mean, I wrestled with a little bit in some of my previous writing, but she's a political philosopher, and she really draws out some of these ideas and talks about them, in terms of their historical scope. And her argument is basically that employers basically shape our lives, like literally shape the day, like the way we spend our time, and also the way we relate to other people to such a massive extent, and that we don't really realize it. So she's arguing that, the example she gives, your employer can, through direct orders and kind of social pressure, dictate how you dress, what kind of people you hang out with after work, where you socialize after work, what you post on social media. I mean, I'm sure many people can relate to the self-censorship on social media for fear that their boss or their employer might see something that they disapprove of. We bend to what our employer's wishes, or what we think those wishes are. And she points out that we do this against, in a culture in which we constantly talk about how free we are. And she's really investigating, the discrepancy between, the way we talk about freedom and how much freedom we actually have in our lives.
That's what's so hallucinatory during the Obama years, to see people complain about the federal government destroying their freedom and becoming this dictatorship. It's like, who is the person who controls when you piss?
Exactly.
It's not Barack Obama. Barack Obama has never told you that you can't piss.
Unless you're in a mosque with him.
And that's the thing is, like, the employers, whether they exercise these rights or not, and we can get into that, they do hold the right to control and also shape some of the most intimate behaviors of our day-to-day lives, including, when and even if you're allowed to use the toilet. That was a matter of contention at some, this is really gross, but at some food production plants back in the 90s, whether employees were even entitled to a bathroom break. And including, who you partner with, right? Like, do you feel comfortable, like, taking someone, if your workplace has a picnic on a weekend that you're kind of not paid to go to, but socially pressured to go to?
My mom called it mandatory fun.
Mandatory fun, yeah, canned fun. Like, all of those awful, like, I don't know if you've seen these videos of Walmart staff being like forced to jump and clap before their shifts.
Oh my God. It's the most debased kind of like demoralizing thing. The mandatory fun and the like sort of social assimilation that you're expected to treat your your employer as your loved ones and your family.
Well, and I think a good point that you bring up is if you were to take that same scene of like enforced fun and everyone clapping and jumping for their like boss or the CEO or whatever, and just replaced it with the head of state, people would like, it would look like North Korea.
Oh God, I can't wait for this to happen. Is when people start getting jobs and then one of their quote unquote fringe benefits is they get a Fitbit. Hey, you can manage your health. And then 2 weeks later, the Fitbit, they get an email saying, we noticed that you haven't been doing the required number of steps. Please do 2,000 steps in the next 48 hours or sanctions will be applied upon your employment. That's going to fucking rule.
They already have like collective fitness things where they're like, join our employee fitness project. I got an email from one of these once at a job I had, and I remember being like, one, how in God's name is this your business? I'm not even full time enough to get fucking insurance. Two, what the fuck is your problem? I'm fine. Are you calling me fat? Fuck you.
Basically, when we enter an employment relationship, we essentially, because in the United States, at-will employment is the norm, you essentially cede all of your rights to your employer, except for a very specific few that are like explicitly coded in law. But other than that, anything that's not explicitly coded as, illegal, like for your boss to do, they can do.
And this gets back to the idea of like contracts, right? And Anderson in this book, then you talk about, she sort of traces this back to the idea of like markets being a liberatory force in like the 17th and 18th century, and like the levelers and this tradition that stretches from, Adam Smith to Thomas Paine, where the way society was organized, in the, like I said, back then, things like contracts and like the, markets actually were a liberating thing for individuals, right? But like that has changed a great deal over the last couple centuries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the time that the levelers and some of these are like the 17th and 18th centuries, these were people who were trying to think of ways to liberate people from like old feudal orders and hierarchical orders in which, authority was kind of inscribed from birth or kind of inalienably within a particular structure. So whether that was your obligations to your lord or to your church or to your family, right, with like a patriarchal head, these people were like, well, open markets kind of provide this possibility for greater equality when we can have people, through contractual relationships, entering into relationships on equal terms and also departing on equal terms. And this was kind of a great hope until, and Anderson points out, what these people couldn't foresee was the Industrial Revolution. So in these kind of very positive, hopeful views of open markets or market societies, she points out that the assumption is that everyone is going to be self-employed or proprietor. So, you go to your baker who's self-employed and you conduct an exchange and then you both leave as you were before.
This is like the libertarian ideal of like how capitalism currently works, right?
Yeah, and she's basically arguing that libertarians are kind of using 17th and 18th century arguments to make sense of a world that does not align with these ideals.
Yeah, but it's going to come back. That's what's so amazing. Is that we got these markets as a way to sever these oppressive feudal ties, and then we got a couple hundred years of capitalist development, and now we're in a situation where people are back to thinking of employment in feudal terms. Like in America, like the rhetoric of job creators, the basic premise of it is that these people are giving people employment out of the goodness of their heart. Like it's an altruistic thing to hire people instead of the reality, which is that you are exploiting them and taking their surplus labor and using it for yourself. No, you are doing a good thing for these people. One of the most amazing things Donald Trump said during the campaign is when someone asked him, people talk about sacrifice and veterans. What have you sacrificed?
And he says, I sacrifice all the time. I employ thousands of people.
Oh, he's so awesome.
Because, you extract the surplus labor of thousands of people. They are the reason you live in a gold-dipped, shitty house in fucking in Central Park West. But because we've created this weird, because we've allowed capitalism to go far beyond the level where it's any longer a useful system, we're so much into this curdled sort of just dead end, this cul-de-sac of history, instead of going beyond capitalism, as we should have done long ago, and as we certainly stood by now, we're now basically turning back into feudalism. And we now see our fucking employers as feudal lords who give us our paychecks out of their beneficence.
Yeah, well, it's like a weird combination. I think you're right. We see them at, they are these kind of feudal lords, but at the same time, there's also this rhetoric of equality, too, that we constantly kind of cling to I think, basically to kind of intoxicate ourselves against the harsh reality of the fact that we are vastly unequal. When we talk about employment contracts, so on the one hand, there's this feudal, Donald Trump system, I'm, being so generous and giving you all these jobs. It's they talk out of two sides of their mouths. So that's the one side. And the other side is this belief that we cling to that employment contracts are agreements between equals. They're not. And that's another point that Anderson draws out, and she has this great line about, just because a relationship is consensual doesn't mean that there's no hierarchy within it. But yeah, so just as we talk about freedom, we live in this free country and we have all these great freedoms, we do the same thing with rhetoric around equality. We're so equal. I'm equal to Donald Trump, or I'm equal to Barack Obama, because I could potentially enter into a contractual relationship with these people willingly. And it's yeah, but not really. Yeah, that's that whole myth of equality that, your individual talents or luck can take you as far as, as you might wish to go. And that was the old dream, too, of market societies. But, we just don't live in that world. That world never existed, but we don't live in a world that I think even in which it even makes sense to fantasize about that anymore.
One of our favorite things to make fun of sort of reveals how much of this brainworm has seeped into this culture, and that is sort of success win Instagram shit. It's, if you go on there, what people now do for leisure, what people do for fun, and when they're sort of off the clock, even when their boss can beckon them with email to do something to continue to blur the lines between off the clock and on the clock, they follow these accounts where it's screenshots from movies about people who are so committed to capitalism that they lose everything. They lose their family. They lose their friends. They end up as fucking losers who hate themselves, like Goodfellas or Wolf of Wall Street. And they take individual shots of this movie where the hero is happy, and it's something like, I stopped going to the club and I started going to the bank. Or the moment that I decided I wanted to be my own boss is the moment I cut out all the fake people. And it's initially
they didn't finish the movie.
Yeah, they didn't finish the movie, but it's also it's interesting, A, because the heroes of these movies are just end up as in a way worse position than they started out with. But B, it's interesting because it is very feudal. All these things are about, they're all about grinding. It's about becoming the feudal lord. It's about becoming the boss. It's about casting off all the people who weren't predestined to be in charge like you were, and to end up as Leo Wolf of Wall Street, or whatever the character's name was.
Who went to jail.
Yeah.
Well, you bring that up, and it's this sort of parallel youth culture thing about grinding and working hard that's supposed to be in opposition to the stereotype that millennials are lazy and don't work hard. And Miya, actually, you don't mention it in the article, but I wanted to ask you, what do you make of this trend in pieces that I feel a variation on it gets written every other month or something, and in Forbes or Business Week or Bloomberg or the business press about how hard it is to have millennials as employees? Because I swear to God, one of the things that they all say is they expect to leave when their shift is over.
Yeah. I know. I saw one of those, and it was like they expect, you know, perks, and you know, like they all want to leave at 5 p.m. And I've seen this article probably, in its many iterations. Yeah, it's. I mean, it makes me I feel very warm-hearted to millennials. But it's kind of like, I mean, it actually gives me a kind of hope, because I feel like, gosh, if young workers are, you know, if these trend pieces are real, and, you know, you never know. But if there's a kind of mass, like a kind of, if this is actually a thing, then I'm like, well, there is some potential for kind of organizing as some kind of working class, you know, if these are desires and, God forbid, even demands that, you know, the next generation or, you know, the current generation of workers might be making. Of course, organizing is, you know, the big if. But it just shows like how, the previous generation, I think, or, I mean, I don't want to turn this into a generational thing, but employers, like once people become employers, you know, and once they go to the other side of having to extract labor, I think it changes people's worldview very much, where they're like, you know, no, why do you want to do these other things besides, you know, stay in the office all the time? And I think it just shows you how, you know, once they kind of get promoted or quote unquote graduate into that role, you know, I think those are people who, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago might have been the people wanting to leave at 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but as we learned from the amazing ad that you can see in the New York City subway at any time for the app Fiverr, whatever the fuck that is.
Yes.
You eat coffee for lunch. Follow through on your follow through. Sleep deprivation is your drug of choice.
You're dying.
All of this grinding and working and hustling, like so much of it is just unproductive. It's just for the sake of controlling people and like sleep depriving them and keeping them busy so they don't do other things.
Which
like
is what fucking cults do, by the way. That's like the number one practice of all cults, is to deprive the cult members of sleep so that they lose the ability to judge the rationality of what you tell them to do.
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to someone recently, you know, and she was just saying, you know, we were talking about people like having to string together these kinds of gigs and how important organizing is. And she's like, you know, but it's just so hard after you've come home from your second job and you're just so tired. And I'm like, that's the point. The point is like after they take everything out of you so that you are literally too exhausted to go to a meeting about, you know, possibly forming a union or something, you know?
Okay, how do we get rid of work?
Yeah, let's talk about the second book.
Honestly, like way less of it needs to be done than we think does. I mean, Keynes was, as you said in the article, Keynes was talking about like halving the work week 70, 80 years ago. And productivity has increased, as people had predicted it would, in such a way that the 40-hour work week is a complete anachronism, and yet that's still considered some sort of inviolate natural law. So how do we get to the point where like we're actually just inputting what needs to be input, and then everybody gets to share the fucking spoils of that, as opposed to everybody working themselves into nubs on bullshit and like just new fantasized ways to extract income for owners of new bullshit businesses.
Right. Well, this kind of gets into the second book that I wrote about in the article, which is by James Livingston. And he's, I mean, on the left, like there's the two common approaches, like to get rid of work or to vastly reduce the amount of time we spend doing it. On the one hand, some people are for like a universal basic income or UBI, and like that's the you know priority, that we need to do that first, and then fit other things in place around it. And then on the other side, there's full employment, which and those two things have sometimes been diametrically opposed. I don't think they necessarily have to be. But there are a number of ways. So obviously the universal basic income, distribute an income, meet people's basic needs, and then they can, theoretically choose how much they want to work on to supplement that. Full employment doesn't necessarily mean politicians, the way full employment gets talked about in mainstream politics is job creation, job growth, right? And that's not what we want. We don't want more work necessarily because we're already doing probably more than needs to be done. But there is this idea that you could distribute the work that actually needs to be done and distribute these burdens that aren't going to go away anytime soon. I'm kind of sympathetic to that idea of, distributing burdens, not necessarily job growth, but then, that would give everyone, it would give everyone a share in kind of taking care of society's needs, but also reducing the number of hours. Because right now you have this sick situation, right, where you have some people working 60, 80, 90-hour weeks. And then you have a huge pool of people who are unemployed and therefore not really able to meet their needs. That just seems bizarre and unnecessary to me.
For me, the thing that I keep going back to when it comes to universal basic income schemes is that, if the future is one in which fewer people are going to be doing work, and it seems like that's inevitable, across all the entire spectrum of employment, from white collar to manufacturing, automation and those things are drastically reducing the actual number of manpower hours that you're going to need to produce things. That seems like that's an inescapable reality. But the idea, okay, well then people will just be given this universal amount of money. The way traditionally that non-capitalists have organized themselves and used their leverage to extract concessions from capital has been through their position as workers.
Yes,
and in a world where there is this vast pool of non-workers, the question that I guess I still wonder about is, how do non-workers in a world where most people aren't workers organize themselves? If they're not doing it on the basis of themselves as employees, how are they going to exert the kind of force that needs to be exerted to extract the necessary concessions from capital?
Right. These are really important questions. You couldn't see me, but I was nodding through all of that. And this is my big hang-up with UBI as well. And as I think I said in the article, these are all tactics. They're not the end in and of themselves, right? And we see that already with automation. A lot of, kind of left futurists are automation will save us from work. I'm automation is technically saving us from work, but the rewards of automation are all going to the owners of capital. So on their own, these things aren't going to save us. And that's one of the reasons why I think the idea of full employment and distributing those working hours is, to me, slightly more practical, because then if you kind of expand, the number of people who have bargaining power, that's how, maybe my imagination is limited, but that's exactly, as you say, how workers have best actually received, successfully demanded better conditions for their lives. And with the UBI, you can have a society with a UBI that's very unfree. I don't think most leftists want to live in some kind of petro state, right, where okay, you live in this government, under this government that gives you money, but then that doesn't necessarily mean you have these other freedoms, right? The freedom of speech to assemble, and so forth. So I think, I think you're absolutely right in your skepticism, which is one that I share.
Well, another critique of the UBI I wanted to bring up with you now is that it would ruin us spiritually. And I'm referring to, of course, an article by Damon Linker in The Week this week entitled It's entitled "The Spiritual Ruin of a Universal Basic Income," and I just want to read one paragraph here. And this is exactly what Livingston is attacking here. This idea that work is something that gives us not just an income, but spiritual meaning and fulfillment. Linker writes here, when we say that an employee, quote, earns a living, it is not merely a synonym for receives a regular lump sum of money. Actually, yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. But it says there's the element of deserving. Earns is crucial. A farmer toils on the land and then receives his reward when he harvests his crops, some of which his family eats and the rest of which he sells at market, blah, blah, blah. He goes on. But he goes on to say, a job gives a person purpose, a reason to get up in the morning, to engage with the world and interact with fellow citizens in a common endeavor, however modest. At the end of the week or month, there's the satisfaction of having earned, through one's own effort, the income that will enable oneself and one's family to continue to survive and hopefully even thrive. But Miya, like, how would Livingston respond to this idea that it's not just you're earning money, you're earning a reason for existing, or you're justifying your existence in some way by having a job?
Yeah, I mean, this is the part of his book that I found most compelling and that I agree with the most is, he launches this like full, all-out attack on this idea that work is kind of the source of meaning in our lives, and that we're kind of morally and spiritually degraded without work. And I think that and he's absolutely right that this idea for centuries has been used very effectively as a means to kind of encouraging workers to self-discipline themselves, like, telling themselves, like, I'm doing something meaningful. And I mean, to be honest, like, all of these things, it kind of, if you fully buy into it as a worker, it does kind of blunt the pain, right, of having to, jump and clap your hands for your boss under the threat of starvation. But I think, that just shows how poisonous it is. And also, it's such a narrow way of thinking about, where we can get meaning in our lives. Right. Like, so, and it's also like a very culturally specific idea about work being tied to meaning. I mean, even if you stay within the capital W West, like, people didn't always think this way in the Middle Ages, right? Or in antiquity. Like, work was something that, got in the way of the really important stuff in life, right? Like thinking and kind of being a citizen. So, I mean, all of this is complete, like, rubbish that, people tell themselves, I think, on the one hand to cope, but also, people like this guy, it's just a kind of self-validating, as Matt was alluding to in his lovely remarks about kind of validating a system that has benefited them, even though they earn a lot of money for not doing terribly meaningful things.
So, like, Miya, one of the things you said, you talked about work being keeping us from what is best in life, as Conan would say. You used the word in the first paragraph, daydreaming. So like, it's not just that we would be more productive doing things outside of like a job or office setting, or it's just, what if people would just prefer not to do anything at all? Like, is that horizon possible, or like, what would that look like in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say what it would look like because we're so far from it, in our lived realities. But there's a wonderful book called Free Time. I think it's called Free Time, The Forgotten American Dream by a historian, Benjamin Klein Honeycutt. And, he talks about, like people like Walt Whitman and these other thinkers who kind of looked forward to a future of abundance where we could, kind of fully experience our world by walking around and enjoying nature and chatting with our neighbors and, not necessarily kind of having this sword over our necks about having to be productive, in the market sense. But I think, like We can't even, that's kind of the point also that Livingston's making, is that it's hard for us to even really imagine what a kind of full life outside of waged work could even look like. But that it's worth trying, because this current system is oppressing and soul crushing for like.
I'll tell you what it is. It's gaming in the morning, posting in the afternoon, and Instagramming after dinner.
Sounds like heaven.
Okay, I think we should leave it there. Miya, thanks so much for talking to us. The article is in the New Republic, titled "The United States of Work," and also your book, "Do What You Love." Regan Arts, "Do What You Love." So, Miya, thanks for talking to us. Thanks for doing this work. Hope it was fulfilling spiritually and monetarily for you.
It's very meaningful. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so are we rolling? All right, let's do this. Okay, we are back. As I alluded to, we have a special reading series this week that is healthcare themed, and it's one queued up for Tim especially.
Hell yeah.
This reading series, we're returning to an old favorite. I feel like we're doing the Chapo reunion tour over the last couple episodes, but our favorites, there are favorites because they always deliver, and they always come correct. And this time, we're talking about my man David French.
The French kiss.
The French Connection.
Yeah.
You might remember David from past reading series involving how to playing World of Warcraft with your son.
Yeah, testing young men's grip strength.
Yeah.
He's had a lot of hits. The most recent one before this, where he got outwitted by a child in an office basketball pool.
Yes.
Oh, that guy.
That was my yeah.
So cool.
Is he the guy that somebody wanted to run for president but nobody else
Yes,
did?
exactly.
Okay.
Bill Kristol briefly floated him as a possible presidential candidate, but even he was just like, I don't have the charisma. I'm detested by my coworkers, friends, and family.
Before they were like plotting on him running, Bill Kristol was like, "Now, David, you're gonna have to pretend like you're not married because women are going to be too attractive to you and they're going to want to be with you. So you have to take that wedding ring off." And he just wouldn't do it.
Nope.
He's too principled.
Nope. So this week's piece from David is sort of in response to what we've just been talking about with the AHCA and the very grim reality that this will probably lead to a not insignificant amount of people dying who otherwise wouldn't for lack of health care. So David, will see that. He'll see that, and he'll raise an interesting thought experiment here. The title of this article is "We're All Murderers Now."
Yeah.
The subhead is "Bob is dead and everyone is to blame but Bob. They killed Bob. What about Bob?"
I'm going to.
He's dead.
I'm just going to hazard a guess right here. I'm going to guess that this reads sort of like an 8th grade experimental nonfiction where he's sort of trying to spread his wings, but he's 67 years old. And
Bob is a man of contrasts.
Yeah, he's been writing the same way his entire fucking life, just a joyless husk who condemns people for anything and has a list of grievances about mild pranks that were played on him 40 years ago.
By children.
By children.
Okay, Bob is dead. That was actually, I think it's the title of a Smiths album.
It's the first line of Lost Highway.
You're right.
No,
Bob is Dick Laurent is dead. Okay, so here's David French here. They say that high blood pressure is the silent killer. And in Bob's case, they were right. Years ago...
Off to an amazing start.
So far, great. Off to a great start.
Years ago, Bob lost his health insurance after Republicans repealed Obamacare. So he started skipping his annual checkup. It was too expensive to pay out of pocket, and the free clinics were just too far away and too crowded.
What free clinics? Wait, sorry. So I'm guessing this is like a sci-fi thought piece about the America 2020 or whatever.
Yeah.
And somebody has made free clinics in this country?
Well, they were too far away. They were too crowded.
There's one of them. Yeah, it's in Canada. You have to go to Montreal.
That's what he thinks Geek Squad is.
So French continues, besides, he felt okay, a little tired maybe, but there wasn't any emergency, at least not until he was running across a rainy Target parking lot, carrying bags of groceries in both arms, and his diseased heart stopped.
Can we note that this is Target? What does David think he's running away from at Target?
Bathroom sickos.
Bathroom sickos.
Bathroom sickos.
Yeah. We know who really killed Bob.
His arms were full of, his shopping as he was running out of the
His bags were just filled with like the male and female symbol, and he's like, "Oh no, Obama's made these illegal."
Yeah.
His diseased heart just popped in a Target parking lot. This is the most American death of all. So now Bob is dead. Paul Ryan and Donald Trump killed him. The prophecies had come to pass, and he lists a bunch of dumbass tweets about how Republican healthcare reform is going to kill people. He continues, but wait, maybe that's not right. Bob was overweight, you see, and had been for years. Like so many millions of Americans, Bob had grown up on the government's food pyramid, and he learned that a low-fat, high-carb diet was the ticket to good health. So he dutifully did what he was told. When his waistline expanded, he switched up his carbs and dropped the Twinkies in favor of healthy treats like non-fat cookies. Still, he got bigger, so big that he was short of breath after walking up even a short flight of stairs.
All right. Do I like having heart disease and blood disorders? No. Do I like getting bigger, so big that I get out of breath going up the stairs? And David French makes note of it. No, I don't. He's a fucking weirdo. Okay? He looks fucked up. His skin looks like it's falling off. He writes tedious articles about bathroom sickos and his son's grip strength. He's kind of a creepy guy. I don't want him talking about me at all. But it's about how bad do you want it? Do you want to be big as fuck, but shredded, 480 pounds eating non-fat cookies, and then to die in a Target parking lot? Okay, maybe you don't. That's fine. That means you don't do whatever it takes. I'm Bob Piana, the subject of this article.
Rich is dead.
So it says, little did Bob know that those government-endorsed carbs were slowly poisoning him.
How the fuck are they endorsed?
He's talking about the old-style food pyramid that I know you guys all were at the bottom of the food pyramid.
Like
was
you got
bread
in the
and
bottom,
spaghetti,
you got sugars on
and then
top.
sugar was on top.
Cookies
that's
are
all fucked
sometimes
up.
food.
The government endorsed that. Big government made people fat is the point here. So little did Bob know that all those carbs were bad. He was only doing what the government told him. They were making him fat, hurting his heart, and preparing him for that faithful day in the Target parking lot. Now Bob is dead. The nanny state killed him. Its junk science made him obese. So you see what he's doing here with this?
Yeah.
He's setting it up like, you think Paul Ryan and Donald Trump killed Bob, but the nanny state and their big government food pyramid, they killed Bob.
It's the militarized liberal soldiers, the Girl Scouts, that are just force-feeding him Thin Mints. Ironically named after they destroyed his body and heart. Also, I'm so
the
sorry.
Girl Scouts are gender sickos, too.
They are, yeah.
I just learned all the stories about Phyllis and Ernest became true right next to me.
Do you want to move over there?
Yeah,
I'm learning a lot.
I'm used to it.
You like it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not it. The aperture expands. Bob's story continues. That Bob was depressed and anxious. He hadn't had a good job for years, and his once bright future had crumbled before his eyes. He had a promising career years ago, working with Nokia, a dominant technology company that was thriving, selling the one piece of technology that every person in America wanted, a mobile phone. Heck, Bob even heard people were ditching their landlines, buying the most lavish cellular plans. Obama gave them
phones,
with government money, and living exclusively mobile telephone lives. Then came January 9th, 2007, the day Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone. Yeah. If you can imagine Pearl Harbor, but without the effective counteroffensive, then you can imagine the effect of the iPhone on Nokia.
What? Can we talk, we're going to get in, there's a lot of funny stuff to get in here. First, that this article could just be about Steve Jobs. Steve tried drinking naked juice, but he still had cancer. But
Pancreas still failing.
Yeah, Steve tried to use cooling rain noises at night. But can we talk about how bad that sentence is?
It's
if you
horrible.
can imagine Pearl Harbor.
No, if you can imagine Pearl Harbor without the effective counteroffensive.
Oh, every time I imagine Pearl Harbor, I imagine the effective counteroffensive.
Yeah,
Right
just
every
say,
time.
why did he just say it was like Pearl Harbor
Yeah.
for Nokia? Like, but no, he has to like it's his military mind at work. You know,
Commander
he was
French.
he was in the JAG Corps. Okay,
Yeah, like Kurt. He's one of those guys who like shuffled papers, and he's like, "I fought for your fucking freedom to use that bathroom."
The Japanese dropped healing crystals upon.
Torah.
Tora. That was just instructions for using the blend.
for using a vitamin.
Tojo and Emperor Hirohito would get into arguments over who copied who getting the vitamins.
So Bob lost his job at Nokia, and his career never regained footing. He never again enjoyed that same feeling of hope and opportunity. Depression ate away at his insides, hurting his heart until he couldn't take even a short sprint in a driving rain. Now Bob is dead. Steve Jobs killed him. The information age passed him by. This is another culprit. This is the usual suspects. David French is laying them out in the lineup. But wait, there's more.
This is the sequel to The Untouchables, The Unfuckables.
yeah.
Bob was divorced. His ex-wife loses his kids an entire state away. She left him 5 years ago. Her job took her to Nebraska. Bob's sick, elderly parents were in Oklahoma. He couldn't bear to leave them. And she told him that she wasn't going to set aside her career dreams for the sake of his family. She'd sacrificed enough. It was her time now. She had a chance to make something of herself, and he couldn't help her, or he could stay behind. He stayed behind, she pursued her dreams, and the pain of it all drove him to the bottle, where he downed beer and bourbon until alcohol placed further strains on a broken heart. Now Bob is dead. Feminists killed him.
Yeah.
They taught his wife that career was more important than family.
Behind every bourbon bastard is an ex-wife.
Wine moms killed Bob.
So we've got Trump, we've got Paul Ryan, we've got Steve Jobs, and we've got Judge Ellen Pao.
So feminism, family courts, a bitch ex-wife who wanted to live her dreams.
Yeah,
and Bob
my
was
turn. That's what it sounds like.
Okay. But really, Bob will live on. Not as a flesh and blood father, son, and ex-husband.
Most importantly,
as an ex-husband, but rather as something far more important. He'll live on as a symbol. More than that, really, he'll be a political cudgel, a weapon to use to pound your ideological enemies. Because in modern politics, arguments are about extremes, and there is nothing more extreme than death. Healthcare to the extreme.
It's a literal matter of life and death. And he's
He's like,
how typical. People are using the death of a man to talk about
racking up
healthcare.
hundreds of millions of symbols. Use some logic next time, libs.
It's like, it's very cruel of you to politicize the death of this man who couldn't afford treatment.
So this is his closing graph here. This is a short piece, but he's going to bring it all home right now. He says, who killed Bob? Let's first ask this. Whom do you want to blame? Whom do you need to blame? Because we can make almost any allegation work. But there is one thing we must not do. Our politics matter more than his choices. We cannot blame Bob.
I mean, like, he kind of, like, in the first paragraph, is like, couldn't get to the free clinic. Like, kind of explained it right there.
Yeah, that's literally the problem. Like,
the feminists hid the clinic far away in Montreal where he couldn't get to it.
I love that for David French, like, every one of these scenarios are, like, equally culpable for him fucking dropping dead in that parking lot. But here's what's funny. Like, here's what's funny to me about David French in this piece here, is that in setting up all of these scenarios and introducing this character of Bob, this poor asshole who literally died in a Target parking lot, he creates these I would say plausible scenarios for the circumstances in his life that led him to his death, right? He lays all of those out, this vast array of forces in his personal, social, and economic life that, led him to have heart disease and finally keel over. He does that But at the end, he still wants you to blame Bob. And what's so funny about this is, like, you would think that in this article, David French has accidentally backed himself into my view of the world, but doesn't realize it.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, okay, so like, I think conservatives like French, and as we were talking about with you earlier, Tim, about like this whole healthcare thing and this ideology of personal choice and responsibility, they have to believe that like the individual's free will is the most important factor in their fate. That everyone is the author of their own fate, because if that's not the case, then really a whole lot of their ideology falls apart, right? They have to be able to blame people for the bad things that happen to them because they made bad choices. But really, David, in this scenario, has Bob really made any bad choices? Maybe
he got married.
He hit the bottle a little too much. He married the wrong person. He believed the government food pyramid. I mean, are these like...
Right.
Yeah, I mean, like, what was he supposed to do about the food pyramid thing? It's like this fucking moron didn't hire a dietitian. Like, what is he supposed to do in any of these? So, I mean, in the exact first thing, you're like, oh, that's why he died.
Yeah.
To any normal person who reads that, but to like the 50 perverts and weirdos and divorce militia guys that read David French, who read it, they're like, this is a great point about personal responsibility, about how he should have he should have had someone else's life.
So like, yeah, like he in the first snenario, he's like, oh, like Paul Ryan and Donald Trump killed him with their awful healthcare that literally denied him access to healthcare. And then like he sets up the other scenarios to be like, aha, but you know, maybe it was actually feminists and big government and Steve Jobs that killed him. The thing is, like, sure, they're all involved. It's all one big fucking like web of like happenstance and fucking things outside of Bob's control that led him to that fucking Target parking lot.
Yeah.
However, the one thing that maybe we have control over individually is through our collective rights as individuals in a society to demand that things like healthcare just be a matter of course and not something that can be...
David French just argued for a welfare state.
Yeah.
People are supported through economic recession. It's a good cartoon.
But what it scans as to a normal person is like, oh, someone can easily just get jammed up in the happenstances of life and bad luck and catch a bunch of bad breaks and be totally fucked over and basically die and have no recourse for any type of help. But again, like in French world, like, you know, fucking, divorce kills you.
You should have married a better woman.
Yeah.
You should have cut off her access to email when you were married, Bob.
That was in the first draft.
But email killed him.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, in the first draft where he said the information age passed him by, there was probably a paragraph there where he blamed the information age for ruining his marriage.
Bob was pranked by teens constantly in and out of the office, therefore teens killed Bob.
But I chose David French here because I think that he inadvertently reveals the fallacy that's at the heart of this ideology of like personal choice and free will, and that like, if you just made better decisions, then you know I wouldn't have to be taking care of you, or that you know it like that if you make a more austere, where the consequences of one's mistakes are far steeper, then people will make less mistakes. And like the idea is that like these choices that we have, even in a technically free society like ours, are prescribed by a vast array of forces outside of our control. And the way we can mitigate that is through sort of collective action and asserting our rights collectively in a democratic society, that we need a certain baseline of support and mutual solidarity and just, I don't know, money to fucking so that any of these little mistakes don't actually kill you.
Yeah. Again, the thrust of the article is that it's incredibly easy to get run over and left behind by the course of life in our current society. It's the exact reason why you have a welfare state and why certain things are human rights.
And, you know, David is literally stepping over the corpse of a guy in Target parking lot and going, you know, small-brained people would think that this bloated body in an empty strip mall parking lot is a reflection of our society and where we choose to place our values and priorities. I think it's a reflection of this fat asshole. Bye.
Yeah, the only time
small brain dying in Target parking lot because you don't have access to healthcare. cosmic galactic brain sprinting over the guy's dead body with a AR-15 Armalite into the bathroom at Target.
The only time free will is responsible for like someone's heart condition is if it's the song Free Will by Rush, which is a great song, which gets my heart pumping at 185 beats per minute. My doctor hates it, but it's a great jam.
So, to close things out, my response to the life and death of Bob and to David French will be to quote a line from a great artist, the great Lou Reed, from one of my favorite songs of all time. I think one of the most beautiful songs ever written, Street Hassle. He says at the end of the second verse, you know, some people got no choice and they can never find a voice to talk with that they can even call their own. So the first thing they see that allows them the right to be, why they follow it. You know, it's called bad luck.
Damn.
That's Chapo for this week, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Cheers.